order. Nice. Roll call. Let's go to there. Let's see, Aubrey, Bjorn, Brandon, me, Christian, Liana, Greg, Jess, Joey, Josh, Lacey, and someone Terry just came in.
Terry jumped in.
Sean and Zoe. I do not see Messina or Eunice. Do we know anything about them?
Nope, I haven't received anything. They may be popping in when they get a chance. So.
Or they did like me and went to the wrong meeting.
You're not the only one, Terry.
I went to the wrong one too. All right. So anyway, can I entertain a motion to approve the agenda today?
So moved.
Moved by Bjorn and seconded by Jess. I saw her hand up.
We do not have the fancy poll this week.
So in that case,
we can just do a verbal all in favor.
Yeah. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Or show of hands. All right. All opposed. Any apps? What's the word? Abstain. Yeah. Nope. Motion passes, I believe. And can I entertain a motion to approve the minutes of last week's meeting? Motion by Jess. Do I see a second?
Second.
Seconded by Bjorn. All in favor, say aye. Or show of hands.
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed. All opposed. Any abstentions? Motion passes. All right. On to the reports. I don't believe I have anything to report to you guys, so I'll just pass it on to Brandon.
Yeah. Well, hey everyone, I guess we're getting into the deliberations, so it's an exciting time for sure. I don't have a super lengthy report, but I do have a quick little overview report of the S&A survey that we got. Before I kind of share my screen, just want to say we had about 600 responses. We had to take out about like 120 or so, just because they either weren't filled out or they weren't exactly like, they filled out like the student name part, but then they like maybe try to be sneaky or something and not fill out the rest of the survey. So I had to cut those out. And so we ended up with about a response rate of 480 students, which overall is, I think, a huge success. But yeah, I'll kind of get into it, kind of more like the demographics of it, just to kind of show more so like the validity of kind of our survey. Can everyone kind of see the PDF? Cool. Yeah, so I won't really go down into all of the details just because that'll take super long. But I definitely wanted to show and share with you all kind of where the response rates were very quickly. As you can see, we broke it down by academic year. About the majority was first, third, or fourth year. And then we had second, fifth plus, and then graduate student. Obviously the asterisk with graduate student. We added graduate student about like, I think 4 days into the survey being rolled out. So between fifth year and graduate student, there could be a mix. But then we also did by center and campus location, majority were main campus. Second half was like strictly online. And then we had at least some responses from most of like the center campuses. A really interesting question, and I think like a very powerful one, is how many students are actually aware of the service and activities fee that they pay every quarter, which, you know, over a year is over $700. We had 105 responses say that they were not aware of the S&A fee, so really they had no idea what funds all the service and activities on campus, which was a powerful statistic, I think, knowing that, you know, a fourth of the responses had no idea. We also went by ethnicity to break it down. You can see there of Latinx descent. And then we also broke it down by major, just to show that not all the responses were from one college. You can see that there was undeclared, elementary, psychology, accounting, law, ITAM, and it goes all the way down. Obviously, we couldn't really make a drop-down menu, so some there's going to be a lot that are basically the same major, but they kind of like maybe typed it just a little bit differently. But for the most part, we had a pretty wide spread of type of, I guess, academic majors that took it. And then the last one is count of like student types. That could be traditional student, first gen student, transfer student, traditional first gen, transfer, and kind of like the variations go on. We have, I guess like non-traditional LGBTQ transfer. So you can see how there's a bunch of different backgrounds and diverse people who took it. So I just wanted to share that with you all, that we had a very good and diverse, I guess, like response rate from the students. So I think we have a good representation of the student voice when it comes to whether they deem that service and activity the previous, like historically based funded area, if they deemed it essential, if they were satisfied with the service, if they used it at all, and then really the utilization rate. So I kind of broke it down, and there's definitely some stuff that I could go into if it's asked for, but I just wanted you all to know that we have the survey and we've created kind of a dashboard through Power BI. But I also just wanted to emphasize that this is really more so a tool for us to use kind of when we're thinking of, I guess, moving forward into the future versus more of like an influencer on pretty much maybe like this weekend and the couple soon weeks to follow. We're really doing this so that we can like properly assess each service and activity by a year-to-year basis. We've never had data like this before, so it's a very, I don't know, almost like a groundbreaking thing that we're able to actually figure out what the students actually think and use the service and activities. And the goal here is to kind of have, next year they'll do the same survey and we can see how the service and activities are either progressing or digressing, and how S&A can like take action to make sure that student money is effectively being spent so that the students are truly being impacted in a positive way. So I just wanted to say we're doing something big that I think will have almost like a generational impact is the goal. So starting from this year with us being hopefully like a historic S&A committee, going into all the next years to follow, we created a huge, basically, I guess like pool of data, large data set, so we can truly see where the money's going from year to year and pretty much how we can pretty much reallocate money if we see anything, I guess like, I don't know, any deficiency or something like that. So yeah, with that, I yield my time, and I'll definitely have this for us going forward into the future. But yeah, I'll yield it over to Joey.
Thank you. Brandon, there was one question in the chat. I mean, there was a comment from Michaela. Way to go, Brandon. And then Josh asked the question, I don't know if you want to answer it real quick, but are the complete results available in the committee teams folder? And Brandon can touch on it. They're not right now, but it's something because of the sheer size of the data that Brandon just finished compiling. But Brandon?
Yeah, it's more, I guess it's just such a large data set. I know we could probably spend like days going through it. It's, I guess I could have like Joey and Lacey help me out too, but it's more, I guess, a tool that we can use. I mean, when we're thinking of how we can help, I guess, like these service activities improve more so than, I guess, like almost like dictate what like a decision might be. I can put it in there, but it won't necessarily be, it'll be like in a PDF version. It's not through Power BI where you can kind of see the full impact. And so I can put it in there, but I guess it's just not necessarily, I guess, represent what the data truly means. So I think it will, we could probably put like the first like PDF of the overview in the teams, but probably not the whole data set just because of like the sheer size and how long it would take to really analyze it.
Well, and Brandon, I know the other part is, as Brandon's going through and trying to delve into all this, the full survey actually has student data in it as well, that we have to pull out for FERPA reasons before we can share it outwardly, even with the committee.
Yeah, that too. So I guess we'd have to go through the process of like a public records request to make sure that we censor it and pull out all that, I guess, sensitive data first.
Did you have another question, Josh?
I thought I heard you say that the survey collected responses on what services students deem as essential. And I thought that would be very important to know going into this process. So that's why I was kind of curious about it. And so if there's any way to get that summary as a PDF, that would be great. And as a side note, I love large data sets. And I am an employee of the university, so I don't know if FERPA would be an issue with me, but I'm here as a resource, and I'd love to dive into that with you.
Yeah, and I would like to say, like, really, I'm here for this whole conversation as we do deliberates as like a tool to kind of like bring it up and help us look at each and every one of those. I guess just knowing like with students on committee, knowing like FERPA and the difficulties there. But yeah, I know like 100% I'm willing to pull up any of them. I've broken them down by each previous funded service activity. So when we go into conversations and we have any questions, I'm more than happy to share my screen and share that data too.
I think the other part on here, and part of why, because it wasn't intended just for deliberation, is not all the new funding requests are not on there for obvious, and then not even all the current base funding ones are. There is ones that were specifically, the vast majority are, but not all of them. So it's not going to be a complete set when you look at it. But no, I think you'd be very interested in the data for sure, Josh. On my end of things, I guess a couple pieces for the report. I'll give an update. We did have one set of questions we sent out last week that I'll share in a minute before we get into the deliberations. I do want to say thank you to the majority of you all who filled out the survey in advance. We're really using that, and you're going to see here in just a minute that's kind of framing the start of the deliberation discussion. And so the way that's going to work is, and Lacey has all the nice visuals and things for us that she's going to pull up in the spreadsheet that we'll keep track in. But really, based on your all results, we've kind of already pulled it, and you're going to see there's some common pieces, and then there's ones for us to clearly discuss. And so we're really going to start off by looking at the ones that the majority in the survey results marked as fully fund on the request, and give the bottom line dollar figure that's on there. And then jump to the ones that the committee had consensus on do not fund. So that way we can kind of get that conversation and move those off the table. And then you're going to see the part where we're going to spend a good chunk of the time is going to be that mixed group, to either where there wasn't consensus from the survey results, or to where it was fund but at a lower amount, or only if there's available funds. And that's probably where we're going to spend a good chunk of the time for you all discussing and deliberating on all of this. The other part is when we get to the end of things is we will have to provide, after we get the amounts set, of saying here's what we're recommending as a funding piece moving forward, and here's the amount, is also the justification. Some of them are going to be pretty straightforward, especially those that we are looking to fully fund and have traditionally funded. But those that we are looking at not funding the full amount, we need to be pretty specific in our justification on the whys. And Aubrey gets to take the diligent notes on that and help us type all that up. As a reminder for you all, the process really goes, we have to have our recommendation, and this is written into our policies, really by the end of next week that we have it done. At that point, it gets taken to two different locations. Brandon is going to take our recommended allocation and justification to ASCWU, to the student government, for them to look over and provide any feedback or response back to the committee when we come back spring quarter. And then Lacey is also taking it up the official channel to the President's Budget Advisory Committee, in which they will look over those recommendations and then also vote on it. Two things can happen. One, in the ideal world, they vote and they have the similar recommendation that we do, and then it moves up. And Joel, who is here and you'll get to chat with in a minute, takes that up to the Board of Trustees, the President and the Board of Trustees following that. If for whatever reason there is disagreement on the recommendation, that then gets sent back. So from PBAC, if they are wanting to make a different recommendation than what you all are, that gets sent back to you all at our meeting at the start of spring quarter to look over the recommendation and justification and either vote to adopt the modified recommendation, or if there's still disagreement, then we go through the whole piece that's in our policies about the dispute resolution process, which in an ideal world, we get to avoid that. So I won't necessarily go into all of that unless we get to that point, but just to be aware of that, again, that's kind of where it goes moving forward. The other part to be mindful of, and again, I appreciate some of you have already asked this conversation on the side, is as we get into the deliberation on specific funding requests, to be mindful and disclose just with the rest of the team if there is any conflict of interest that you might have with a funding request ahead of time. Twofold, because one, really that means you should abstain from the vote on that particular one if there is a vote that takes place on it. But more so the committee knows why you're not providing any comment or commentary. And I'm going to pick on Greg here. So obviously, Greg has requests that he has brought forward on here and that he is a budget manager for. And so on those ones, he's going to share with you all. This is one he's going to be abstaining from because of a conflict of interest. And that's pretty much it that he will have in terms of that discussion and pieces that come up. And so there's only a handful on here that I can say I'm aware of that there'd be a direct conflict. But if there's ones because you have a direct invested interest, you get an outcome from a funding request, or you're employed by a funding request and it's contingent on those. Those are things that are on there. If you have questions, I'd rather you bring it up and ask, and I can give you feedback, but I'd rather we err on the side of caution just for full transparency with the process, with all of this. So with that said, I know we're going to go into the deliberation piece, and Lacey and I will kind of help to try and guide how that goes, but really we're only here to help guide the conversation and answer questions from you all, but it really is going to be a lot on your all side. And we'll try and, I mean, in an ideal world, we'll power through and can get it done tonight, but realistically, we probably are going to need to use that time on Saturday. And we'll have kind of hopefully a logical cutoff point to then continue when we come back Saturday morning. But I know you can ask more questions about the process when we jump into it. So unless there's anything pressing for me right now, I will yield my time.
I have a question. Is the abstaining you talked about from just the voting or from the discussion and voting? If there's a conflict.
If there's a conflict, it would really be from both unless you're asked to, and so I'll pick on Greg, unless the committee members are specifically asking him a question that's related to it, simply because with the conflict of interest, we don't want it influencing the outcome, and to be mindful that realistically, we should be also trying to refrain from asking because none of the other presenters and program units are able to be here really to answer questions. So we should have the information that we do have. So yeah, great question, Josh.
And are we voting on, are we beginning that process tonight? And if so, is it surveys like we've been doing? And are those recorded by individual? I guess that, I think when we're all around the table in the circ, we raise our hand, right? So it's a little bit different here. I'm just curious how that might play out.
No, so it depends on how the conversation goes, Greg. I mean, in terms of the rules of order, really the part where the committee will be making a motion and doing the official voting will be on the final recommendation. Now, we may need to, if we have a specific funding request that comes up that is not looking like a consensus, either from the survey results or from others that we may have to do a straw poll vote at that time, in which case you would abstain if it was related to your area as it stands within that. But in an ideal world, if there's consensus with you all, there isn't necessarily a need to vote until we get to the very end and we make the motion to approve the recommended funding allocation as presented. And just so you all know, the survey you all completed was to help guide the discussion. That is not a final vote in any way. Knowing as we get into the conversation deliberation, there may be information that's shared that we move in a slightly different direction than what you put on there. So that is just a tool for the committee to help frame the deliberation coming up. Any other questions? Perfect.
Well, I'm going to save my report for later in the agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it back to Christian.
All right, thank you, Lacey. And is there any communications received?
Yes, there is. There's one, and again, we'll have it sent out here shortly, that we sent out. Following last week, there was only one group that questions were sent to, which was CLCE. And so I'll share that with you all here and read the questions. There was 2 questions and responses that came. So first question said, this inquiry is about the rationale for the funding structure, and they're both, the 2 questions fall under this. So first question, does it make more sense for the student engagement, student leaders funding to go straight to CLC's budget? We could just increase the CLC allocation by that amount. The response back, it is our intention to keep the CLCE and student involvement budgets separate. While the reporting structure has changed for the engagement coordinator to report to the director of CLCE, the focus of the roles has not. The engagement coordinator supervises these student positions and thus the budget of the student employment with a specific and critical need for clubs and organizations to remain whole and unchanged. The goal is not to commingle the budgets at this time. And then the second question, why is the CLCE paying for a DEC program manager? You spoke in your presentation of how pressed you are with just 2 professional staff, so I don't see why you are funding any role outside of your area. And the response, during the previous quadrennial, there were needs of delivering on student services that presented themselves, and in such, we were able to be flexible and collaborative to fill such needs. CLC coordinated with the DEC to adjust the reporting change of the program manager position. With the reporting change, a few of the previous co-coordinated established programs that have diversity components were transitioned with that member as well. For instance, the Chavez King Institute moved over. Due to the financial situation of our campus, we remain flat in our ask of the structure and in full recognition that one of the positions is a dotted line with the DEC, dotted due to budget and supervision change to the DEC director. However, with the ever-growing and changing needs of our student body, we still need program managers, 3, to support and focus on leadership, service, and clubs and org support. We believe with our new structure of staffing that we can adapt to meet the needs of our programs and students. The service and activity levels that have been previously met in our current funding cycle will still continue and grow with the years to come. And that is all for communications received.
All right, thank you, Joey. And before we get to new business, we're at public comments. Any questions, comments, or concerns?
And I will make note, I know this meeting is different than our other ones given the deliberation. And so outside of the committee member panelists and presenters who are here, the other attendees are in the chat area. And so you can, during this point in time or throughout, you can send questions via the chat or the Q&A. We'll be monitoring that. But that would really be, besides committee members, the only way to do public comment during these sections.
All right, thank you, Joey. And excuse me. All right, with that, let's get on to new business. The first thing that I see here is the university budget process overview. That's with Joel Clucking.
Thank you. So I have a short little presentation that tries to give a very brief overview of a very complex topic. And so I'm going to just try to hit you with a few PowerPoint slides, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that might provoke or anything that else that you might have been thinking about. So without further ado, I'll share my screen. And so this is basically the university in a nutshell, in 8 fund groups. And really, the university gets its resources from 2 main groups: the government, either federal or state, and students. And yes, we do get alumni coming by and buying t-shirts, and there's other little miscellaneous streams, but I'll bet you 98% of it comes from either government or students. The first, I'm going to work from the right over to the left here. These 4 fund groups that are in the gray and black areas are, we consider them non-operating funds. They're basically either the federal government giving us grants, the state government giving us capital, and it's really restricted. They say, I'm going to give you money for a building, build the building, and we'll reimburse you. For grants, it's a Pell Grant to a student, or here's a research grant. You've got a certain amount of time to spend it, and you can only spend it on that. And so very highly restricted in these really 4 areas. Then you start getting into a little bit less restricted. So the auxiliaries is sort of the business functions of the university: housing, dining, bookstore, parking, those types of areas. And so this is almost entirely student fees for housing, dining, and that type of thing. This money should be spent on things that have to do with the auxiliaries: housing, dining, bookstore, and parking. Here's your little slice right here, $13.5 million, and we call it Student Activities Fund Group. A little over 7 million is the S&A fee, and the rest of it is the CIRC and the REC fees. And those 3 funds are all very interrelated, but of course come from student fees and should stay to pay for things that are related to those fees that we're collecting. You get into the bluer areas here, and it starts to get a little bit more complex. The local general or the summer fee area, about 11 million of this 31 million is from summer school. And the rest are just a hodgepodge of fees, mandatory fees, voluntary fees, course fees, registration fees, all of the fees that you've seen before pretty much go in here along with summer. And then finally, we have the state and tuition fund. This is where all the instruction happens other than summer school. This is where most of our institutional support functions, like the president's office and the marketing department and human resources, all reside here. And this particular fund group is where a lot of there's a lot of contention over this money for a lot of reasons. There's a lot more people working in this area. There's about 1,200 employees that are employed by the state tuition fund. It is the sort of the core function of the university, if you will, for teaching and learning. And we've implemented 4 years ago a new budget model for this particular fund. You can make a general assumption when you excluding these non-operating funds, which is just basically a reimbursement method. These gold fund groups are pretty much already on a commercial model, right? You charge a fee for housing, you give somebody housing, and then whatever money's left over, you pump back into to restore the housing assets. Same for really all 3 of these. This one traditionally has been on an incremental budget methodology. So you basically get what you got last year plus wage and benefit increases, unless you decided to ask for something new, not dissimilar from the process you're undertaking right now. And so 4 years ago, we changed our method to responsibility center management, which works kind of like this. So responsibility center management is a philosophy for managing the colleges, right? So each of the 4 colleges are responsibility centers. And this philosophy says that the deans are supposed to have the authority to make decisions for their college. ABB is short for activity-based budgeting, and that basically is a way to allocate resources. And so here's how we allocate our resources under this current model. First off, all of the revenues for the state allotment, tuition, and summer go to the colleges. The colleges then have to pay for the institutional support costs. So the president's division, my division in business and financial affairs, Josh's division in enrollment management, and operations division. We also subtract out the academic and student life functions that are not a college. So the library and grad studies and student success, for example. So once those costs are paid for, the colleges have the money for developing their own spending budget. And the theory here, one of the reasons for doing this is that we're trying to make this bigger through incentives, right? If you aren't on incremental, you have some opportunity to grow your revenues, to increase your student credit hours, if you could minimize these two areas, that leaves more for the colleges to spend. And that is the major objective of this budget model. So how it really works in reality is, for instance, we break the revenue into 4 pieces based on proportional to the student credit hours generated by that college. So for instance, the College of Business is 13% of the total student credit hours taught. And so they have to pay for 13% of these costs, 13% of these costs, and then ultimately they end up with approximately, plus or minus 13% of the total remainder for developing their budget. And so here's another compelling reason why we knew that we had to make a change. This is a graph that shows, based on going back to 2013. So the decision making on new funding, again, very similar to the process that you're undertaking here. This is not base budgets. This is just the incremental new budget that the State and Tuition Fund has deployed over the years, broken down between the institutional overhead, academic and student life support, and colleges, pretty dramatically favored the institutional overhead and academic ASL support, really mostly institutional overhead. In the recovery from the Great Recession, there was a lot of money put back into central as we recovered from that, but not the majority went to the colleges. In this whole era here, we're sort of recovering from the declines in enrollment. We're starting to grow again. Nothing really to the colleges for new funding. Most of it went to institutional overhead. The idea in RCM/ABB is that you minimize the amount that goes to the overhead and support areas to maximize the amount that goes to the colleges. And so you can see that it finally, this is one of the bright spots of the new budget model, is that it did minimize the amount of money that went to the overhead and support areas and pushed as much as we could to the colleges. So that element of it has actually worked pretty well. It's shown a big spotlight on the decision-making process for how to allocate new resources. There's a whole bunch of other things that are unintended negative consequences that we can talk about if you want to, but there's definitely a need for doing something different from what we've done in the past, at least around decision-making for new funding. Here's another look at the State Tuition Fund. And this is broken down by the 4 colleges. And then I've just kind of grouped everything together in non-colleges to kind of assess how did we do over the last 4 years of this new budget model. Have the expense budgets grown or shrank as a result of this new budget model? So for 2018, arts and humanities effectively flat, but wage and benefits did go up. So that's really not a win for arts and humanities. Luckily, the non-colleges were pretty small that year. Here's the next year after that. This is a brand new biennium. And so the state of Washington gave us very targeted money for some support areas. Otherwise, it would have been looked a lot like 2018. And then 20, again, worked out pretty well for the most part. And 2021, of course, is a very different situation. But the brunt of the budget cuts came from the support areas and not from the colleges, which I think is how it's supposed to work. And then finally, to answer the question in very high level terms, most elements of the university have reserves. They've got their accumulated savings account to get them through tough times or saving up for, expensive initiatives, equipment replacement, that type of thing. And so this kind of breaks down the blue bar, which is the beginning of the year in 2021. This is what, according to our accounting software, every division had in reserves. And then the orange bar is what I think, well, actually that's not what Joel thinks, it's what's in our software as a forecast for what's going to happen by the end of the year. And so you can sort of get some idea of the relative amount of reserves that different areas of the university in the state tuition fund, the state and local funds. So this does include summer school, And some are going to decline this year, some are not, but nobody's going to go negative as a result of the pandemic, which is great. And that is all I've prepared, and I'm definitely happy to answer any questions. Brandon.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. You know, I think over I guess hearing all the base funding requests, something that we've heard a lot, I think, as we also had a growing number of academic departments come request for base funding, is that they say their department or their dean says there's no money available. But then you just showed me saying there's reserves of forecast over $7 million. So could you help us turn the validity of all these colleges saying they're broke?
Well, I'll start by saying, number one, that there are definitely differences in the colleges, right? So those were all the colleges combined. Some of them have more and some of them have less, but there's at least something, at least there will be at the end of the year for every college. Number two, this is a sort of a point in time reference. And what I don't know is what are the plans for those reserves, right? So I have not seen, concrete spending plans or equipment replacement plans for all of that money. It's absolutely part of the plan, I think, for most of the colleges. I think it's also really important for a college to have a safety net to ride through a tough year or to make strategic decisions when they come up. But generally speaking, there's $7 million there, and yes, some of it's earmarked, and yes, it's not distributed equally, but it's there, right?
How much would you think would be a good safety net amount?
Well, so we had a provost ask that question of her deans several years ago. And so each college had to kind of go through and identify what is my kind of safety net. I don't want to go below this floor. And I think that for the larger colleges, so SEPs and COTS, it was $500,000. And I believe for CA and College of Business, it was $250,000.
Okay.
But I'll be honest, CA has had a tough time accumulating reserves as a result of this new budget model.
Thank you.
So they're not at they will be at the 250 probably at the end of the year.
I have a question, Joel. For, some of the academic areas, would there be, you mentioned, some opportunities to request new funding, but specifically looking at fiscal 22, would there be an opportunity for areas in the academic world to request new funding from state and local?
Well, that's entirely up to the dean, right? That's the concept of responsibility center management, is that the dean makes those decisions. And and over the deans, the provost has the authority for all of academic and student life. The provost has the ability to reallocate resources as necessary through a process called subvention. It's part of it's sort of the invisible hand to even things out if it tends to get out of whack. Because what we don't want to have happen is that there's so much disparity in funding that it threatens the survival of a college, which we need all 4 colleges to be healthy, and the provost has that responsibility. So the process for asking for new funding in the academic and student life division is to ask your dean or your provost. If you're a college, you ask your dean. If you're in the academic support areas like the library and grad studies, you ask the provost. The president has responsibility for the other areas, the overhead areas. And so that's kind of how they've divided up the responsibility for this particular fund group. one of the major bits of feedback that I've heard from the deans is that they're very uncomfortable making long-term spending decisions based on the fluctuation of their budgets recently, right? So one of those charts was what's been the growth or decline of every college's budget year over year, and it has not been this sort of predictable line that you would enjoy in your typical incremental budget scenario. So there's some empathy there.
It looks like Greg has a question as well.
Hi, Joel. So following up on Brandon's question there, that the idea of that appears to be a huge reserve. I mean, do we know what portion of that is, for example, student fees that are in accounts that can only be used specifically for a class and can't actually be used for other things?
Yeah, so I really tried to separate all that kind of stuff out. So those numbers don't include mandatory fee reserves. So they have nothing to do with the health center or the technology fee. I've stripped all of the mandatory fees, athletics fee. I've stripped the course fees out. It really is just summer and other kind of fee for service type of fees, like the registration fees and late payment fees, that type of thing. So there's very few restrictions on this money, I'll say. The restriction is really the discretion of the dean.
And it looks like Terry has a question.
Yeah, thank you. My question is kind of similar to Greg's question. This is, self-support money in like the colleges. So I know I've looked at my own college's budget. I'm from the College of Business. We have a huge amount of money that is sitting technically in reserves, but it's professional development money for faculty. For instance, that have already been allocated to faculty. Is this reserve money, including all of that? We have money that's allocated, for instance, to technical support. It's already been allocated by the dean. It just hasn't been spent. So it's technically sitting in reserves. Are you counting all of that money as well?
Yeah, so there's definitely been, because of the pandemic and the inability to spend a lot of that development money. And so it is stacking up. So it is included in there. The sum total of that is probably less than $1 million. So if the end of the year total was 7 million, I would say generously $1 million of that is development funds.
Wow, I didn't know colleges had money for faculty development. That's news.
Well, it's the CBA. You're talking about the CBA money, right, Terry? No? No,
we have in our college, we also have college money that's been given out. So, for instance, in our college, it's a significant, because we haven't been able to travel, it's a significant amount for our particular. I've actually seen our college budget. We actually in our college, we have probably several $100,000 that comes from approximately $100,000 to $150,000 a quarter that we've managed to save over the past year when we went into this. But it's not. When we talk about, $7 million, the College of Business budget is only $8 million a year, roughly. We don't have $1 million in our college budget to spend. Most of that is already been allocated out.
Well, that's a really good distinction. You actually do have $1 million in reserves. I mean, on the books, you've got $1 million and you've been carrying it for several years. But it's earmarked, right? There is an intended use for that money, and so it's not just free and clear. So that's a really important distinction to make. Some portion of every college's reserves are intended for something. There's no doubt.
But the dean can redistribute that earmarked stuff, right? Saying like there's professional development that has not been spent and now they see this reserve. It's up to the deans in the RCM model to be like, oh, we could redistribute this. for like next year? Type thing?
I mean, technically, the dean has the authority to make that decision. It may not be, that'd be a very tough one to make.
Cool. I guess like my other question, Joel, is like, I don't know if it's necessarily right, but it seems like they kind of come to S&A first, and then it's like whether it's a yes or no on if they get funding. Say we get like they say no here. Obviously, like these service and activities probably are not going to just disappear. Are there like other ways to like secure fundings around like campus other than just student funds through S&A?
Well, it depends on what it is. So, I mean, there's we have a foundation that there could be a fundraising opportunity for an idea. There's federal grants. I mean, these are all, we're getting down into the tough to get category, right? I mean, it's really, that's the responsibility and burden, I think, of the dean and the provost, that because of this budget model, the decision-making is really on their shoulders. They have to really believe in the idea and support it moving forward. Outside of that, we're looking at, very, S&A, foundation, federal grants, things that are, not necessarily easy to get.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
Looks like Bjorn has a question.
Yeah. In areas that are governed by the colleges, do the provost and or the president have veto power over the deans?
The provost has veto power over the deans, and the president has veto power over the provost. So this budget model did not remove the responsibility of managing the university from the presidents. But the idea, you would not expect that on day-to-day operations, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, we're in a pandemic. So did we have to do some extraordinary things that may not have been exactly in the rules of the new budget model? I mean, the president has the right to do that for the greater good. Absolutely.
And how often, is there like a time limit for how often funds can be reassigned by whoever's in charge of them?
Well, so the deans, the provost, and then the vice presidents of the other divisions, like me and Josh, should be reallocating funds, at every opportunity, right? So if I have a person retire, I should be looking at that position, that body of work, and sort of thinking about, is there a better way to do this work? Is it time for, to a reconfiguration of some sort? Ideally, you do that with the resources that you have, right? And then if you don't have the resources to do what you need to do, you go ask for, you go through this process of asking for new funding, which has been highly constricted for in general for the last 4 years. And if you're a college or a department, you go to your dean or ultimately the provost.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Lacey has her hand up.
Yes. So Joel, walking into, this deliberation, do you have any kind of words of wisdom for the committee members when they're trying to make their decisions?
Well, I would try to stay true to the intent of the money as best as possible. I mean, and you guys have done such a great job of that over the last, I've witnessed this for 2 quadrenniums, and I'm super impressed with how you do kind of stick to the guardrails that are around this money. And I think that it's important to think about implications on the future as well, right? So those guardrails can change over time, and maybe that's okay. But that's a decision you guys are gonna have to kind of wrestle with. And also don't forget that you have reserves of your own, right? So I think it's all of our responsibility to have some level of generational equity with our funds, right? I mean, the students pay tuition for a purpose, and they should get the service that's associated with that fee. And the same goes with S&A and with housing and dining and all the other fees that we charge. There should be, if you pay it this year, you should receive the benefits this year. And so we've had some good things happen over the years as an institution that have allowed us to accumulate some reserves as a buffer against bad times. But we're not in the business of stacking up money. And so we should use it for what its intended purpose is. Put it to use.
Great, thank you.
That's my 2 cents.
Any more questions for Joel? All right, seeing none, let's go on to the base funding of 2022 to 2025. And the first thing I see is the annual allocation amount.
Oh, I know. I'm sure everybody's so excited to get to this part. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. Is that coming across okay?
Yes.
Oh, can you guys? Okay, yeah, we're good. So as I try to get my mouse here working, so this is just a quick pivot table to really kind of look at some of the survey results that y'all had submitted the last few days. But I think the important piece that I want to bring up first is what is going to be our allocation limit or overall dollar figure that we have, and that's going to be this 7.4 million figure. So to give you some idea and context, is our fiscal 21 allocation, which is our current fiscal year, is actually 7.3. So this is showing a bit of an increase per what we are currently allocating out. Now, does anybody have any questions about that overall figure before I move on? So moving on, I wanted to talk about the survey results. Primarily,
Sorry, I have a question.
Oh, yes,
Why would
Josh.
the figure be more if we have less students than we had last year?
Yes, that's a good question. So a couple of this is based off of an enrollment number of about 11,000 students that we are projecting to have in our next fiscal year. And so we're talking about going into kind of an enrollment decline. And so it is an obvious question of why would we have an increase? I want to kind of bring up that, I guess the easiest way for me to explain it is there's a couple of pieces that tie into this. One, as much as we can allocate out, we also don't spend 100% of that allocation each year. And that's not necessarily to anybody's fault, but that is just kind of the nature of how the numbers work out. So that also ties into it. But then I do want to also highlight that we've also been in a purchasing freeze for the past year now, coming up on a year. And so not only did we start the year off with a handful of large reserves, but we're also banking up that money. So, with a lot of people in the room to talk about what this allocation is, we believe that 7.4 allocation is kind of in the middle of the road. It's not necessarily a conservative number, but it's also not the highest number that we could potentially allocate. Josh, did that help answer that question at all? Does anybody else have any questions about the allocation number? Okay, great. Now, I do want to bring up that if anybody has any concerns about that, feel free to always reach out to me directly. But it is something that we will look at each year. We always look at each year. This is something that we continue to look at enrollment and what those enrollment trends are. So kind of moving back into the survey results from the committee members that took the survey is there's a few categories that we had. A couple of them did make a lot of sense, and the majority of the individuals that took the survey did vote on, these are the select areas that we chose not to fund, and then fully fund. And then the next category is fund, but at maybe potentially a lower level. And then I wanted to explain this next category, this split. And what this means is this is where I would say we as a committee need to really look at each one of these requests that are underneath there. And I'll expand this here in a second, but pretty much it was a split decision. So there was a lot of answers across the board in these categories. There was not a very clear majority. So I don't know, I guess we could probably potentially go into the fully funded category first. So okay, great. So what this is showing is the fiscal 21 allocation and the fiscal 22 request. And in this column, this would be potentially, keep in mind, potentially the proposed allocation. So if this is based off the survey results, if this is what the committee decides that they agree on, these areas would be the categories that the majority said they would like to fully support their request for fiscal 22. So you have ASCWU and their handful of different departments. You have the Career Services West Side counselors. You have CLCE. You have the admin fee. You have the Diversity Center at DEC, Museum, Office of Student Involvement, Case Management, International Studies, Undergrad Research, which is also SOURCE, Publicity Center, Scheduling, Student Funds Financial Manager, Student Union, Sub-Custodial, Circ Accounting, the Bond Payment, Engineering, the Veteran Center, Wellness, and the University Centers.
Oh, never mind. Aubrey answered the question. I was just going to answer it for those on there. Greg had asked the question about how many members do we have and how many completed it. And Aubrey answered, we have 12 voting members, 9 of them completed it. Out of those who didn't complete it, only one student was one who did not complete it. So the vast majority of these responses are the student voice from the committee on here.
Great, thank you for answering that. So kind of moving on, and I'll talk a little bit more about what these numbers mean, but I wanted to talk about the categories. And so moving into the fund, but potentially at a lower level, I think this shows support, but maybe we could potentially talk about the overall dollar figure that's being requested. And so we have campus activities, we have the garden, we have a new funding in this category, Institution for Innovation, KCWU, Marching Band, Pulse, the Recreation Center. Keep in mind, they combined their requests into one. And so they have a list of the admin support, the OPR, intramurals, sport clubs, and Camp CWU. We have the art gallery, we have the Observer, and then we have the West Side Student Life. Now, I do want to point out in this category, we do have a new funding. So this has not been previously funded, which is why there's a 0 in this column. But then also the Student Life program was one of those that did increase their request by a substantial amount. So some of these that we see, their increase was either primarily due to healthcare costs going up or maybe student wage impact, but this one was one of those that was really kind of a change and potentially growth in that program. So with kind of the rhyme or reason of what I'm looking at here is these numbers in this column is just based off of what they've requested. Now, when you look into the split category, I removed that request out of this proposed column, just to kind of give you an idea of what optically it would look like. I'd like to reiterate that this is not final. The committee does get to deliberate and talk about this, but this gives some perspective of what that survey said. So the split category is what I would say was really across the board. We had areas that were fully supporting and wanting to fund it. We had other areas or other responses that wanted to fund but at a lower level and potentially even not fund at all. So in these categories, we have career services, the peer advisors, we have Central News Watch, we have the College of Business, the accounting department, which I believe is the Hopin software, ECLC, the Childhood Learning Center, Homecoming, Lions Rock, Menashtash, Pep Band, the Randall Hall Building Monitors, Student Financial Services, Theater Arts, and Wildcat Sports Radio Network. Now, as you can see, there are a few new requests within this category. So when you see this 0 in this column, that means that they are new requests. And then to go up to the top of over here is the do not fund category. So this is where the majority did choose this, and this has to do with this. So the areas that are in this is the art design, the College of Business, student clubs and events support, and Money Savvy, and music department and Wildcat Films. And I actually think, did I mess that up, Joey? Is the student clubs and events, is that Hopin? Did I miss? Okay, so I'm sorry about that. I did mix those up. So the accounting College of Business one is not Hopin. This one is not. So anyways, so with what we're looking at, it does show that these don't have an allocation currently. And if we were to look at this and just say, what is our bottom line? It looks like we have a rough estimate of $337,000 that would not be potentially allocated out within these two, including just the two categories of fully fund and funded at a lower level.
I do want to jump in and say, when you look at that, the part when Lacey gave that bottom line dollar is those that are funded at a lower level, again, because we need some discussion because we don't know what that amount would be. So that dollar figure is based on their request, is where we'd be looking at. But before we delve into that, I want to do it kind of strategically here, based on this. And the survey results, what we did was based on what would be a majority of the committee, is where this fell. Again, while it was not a final vote, is I do want to look at those that you all marked from the survey results to fully fund, just to quickly see, is there any one in there that there is discussion, or from those who had questions before we kind of stick with that fully fund group and move to the other ones where we need to spend a little bit more time. Thank you. For those of us who have a tiny screen that we're all leaning in to look at.
Is the Wellness Center the PATH coordinator?
Yes, it is. Yep.
I want to talk about that one for sure.
Okay. And so we'll leave that there. I mean, so we can jump into that. The other part before, and I forgot to mention this, is you all were, as those of you who took the survey know, there were 4 options. As you will see, there are only 3 here, because the option for fund, but only if funds are available, was not one where there was a majority vote. Most of those where that was voted on are in that split category that we'll end up spending time on. So with that though, so Brandon, why don't we go ahead and jump to the wellness one then, and bring that up. What is your question? And we can pull up the info here. And I don't think we said this earlier, so I apologize. If you do want to, and again, hopefully you all know, as we talked about before, Aubrey has set up in the Teams folder all of the deliberation documents. She went in for each of those survey results as well and created the graphic for each of those, and so you can see them. I know Lacey and I both have them also pulled up at the same time, so we can pull those to see. But with that, what was the question? And I guess I can share this, Brandon. The Wellness Center one, we received 7 votes that said to fully fund it, 1 to fund it but at a lower amount, and 1 to not fund it. And so the 7 looking to fund it. So I'll open it to you on the questions or deliberation on that one specifically.
Well, I was just like, I guess the question for sure, but like the PATH one is like, that's like the position that's like mandated, right? By like the state, or is that the case manager? Maybe I'm getting confused, but.
So I will answer that and then provide some context here.
They
yes,
answered it before, so I know it's not like wrong to ask that question. So.
You know, you are right. I think the part that I will, because again, it's not really during their presentations to step in, I will kind of clarify that answer. Yes, that is the position that Marissa answered is required. What I will tell you is the position itself is not mandated and required. It is required via those VAWA and Cleary and Title IX that she had answered to provide those services, but it does not dictate in what manner or shape that is. Those can be from outside resources. They can be as a subpart of a position. So the answer was correct, but I want to be clear for you all as we deliberate here that it is not a federal mandate to have this position on the university's campus.
Okay. Well, I feel like I just want to have like the discussion, knowing like just like the wellness center, and maybe just like the position specifically, since it's like definitely like almost a law to have those services displayed. I almost feel like that is like the wellness center and that specific coordinator is almost like a staple event that should be provided by the university. I don't necessarily think it should be coming out of the S&A budget. It shouldn't be put on the students through our service and activities fee to pay for that. Knowing that at every university, it's almost a guarantee that there is a wellness center and a path coordinator almost mandated by law to have. So I almost like, and knowing from Joel that there is money elsewhere, a substantial amount of money elsewhere to fund that, especially, and that goes beyond obviously the colleges and the academic side of it. It's just like, I don't necessarily think this should be coming from the S&A. So I think this should have like a consistent, permanent funding from whether that is like the tuition budget, but I really honestly don't think this should be coming from the S&A side, especially with like knowing that the way that they're asking for S&A to provide for it isn't competitive enough to even fill the position, and it hasn't really been filled. So it's like, I think we're doing a disservice to the students going through S&A when this should truly be going through the college, the university as a whole, and we could actually get like this position filled and get the ground, like the ball rolling much faster, in my opinion, that way. So I mean, I would definitely voice my opinion as in like we shouldn't fund this and pretty much demand or force the university to take action and put it pretty much, yeah, basically make sure that this is, you know, funded somewhere else and not put on the students. But with that, I'll definitely open up to discussion too.
I was gonna say Bjorn.
Yeah, Bjorn has his hand up.
I had similar concerns to Brandon. I think he's entirely right in saying that this is such an elementary service that it should be, you know, provided by the university rather than by students' own money. I do worry, however, that if we pass this thing with do not fund in an attempt to force them to fund it in some other way, I worry that the PBAC would bounce that right back to us and hit us in the face like a kickball. So for now, I'm going to put my vote as do fund this, but work closely with the Wellness Center to basically lobby the university to figure out another funding source in the next 4 years. I don't want to wait 4 years, but it's better than risking having a huge fight over this and potentially not being able to fund this position that's, or these services that are so important. Correct me if I'm wrong on the political math going on there.
No, I think you have that, Bjorn. Well, I guess I'd ask the question because I appreciate the perspective, Brandon. And I know that's kind of come up in discussions from the committee on some of these others, and I think we'll have similar with this, but knowing that there were 8 of you who said to fund it, I guess I would ask for if there's any additional justification. And for those of you, I mean, I guess I'll share this here because you can look in there. The only comment that was shared on this one from the survey is I think this is a necessary and very valuable. A discussion needs to happen about how this position should be paid for at the university level. So again, not sure if that is one of the 7 or the 8 who said to fund it, or from the one saying not to fund it. But yeah, Terry.
And Terry has her hand up.
I completely hear Brandon, and I agree with that. I think this is the one place where we could where the committee could push back at the university and say, look, I mean, we did this with advising before. If I wasn't on the committee then, but the last time they did it, they funded an advising, at least half funded an advising position on the west side that wasn't there before from out of S&A, which I remember reading on the committee saying they didn't really want to do this and didn't think that you should do this. And honestly, Brandon, I feel the same way about career services on the west side as well. The fear of not funding that is then the students will get nothing. And so I hear you that this is the one place where the committee might be able to say, no, we're not going to fund this out of S&A, and it would get funded someplace else. So I completely see you, and this is the place to make that point. If that is the point that you want to make. I will say in all of this, I'm a faculty member, not a student. And so it's all your money. It's not my money that's being spent. So I view my position here as to give you guidance and explanation of how kind of the university works and where I think you might be able to do things. But it's really about the students here, and it's really your guys' choice to do this. And I think that if you want to make that point, this is the place to make that point.
Yeah, and I agree with Terry, and it's, yeah, to be going too, it's just like, if not now, when type thing. Like, I don't think we give them 4 years, because that was the whole argument. It's like S&A wanted to fund this because we saw it was a need just to get the ball rolling, but now it's clear that it is a need. Students say that they want it, but we aren't even being able to like probably fill that position. And if we were to say no, and I think we should, then the university is guaranteed to take action. There is no, I don't think there's a fear that they're like, oh, well, now pathway is going to disappear, because it can't. It simply can't. There's too many repercussions. They can't throw it back at us because we have this clear reasoning right here. And so for me, I don't think we should fund this. And I think we demand the university with all the money that they have in place to fill this.
Okay, so we'll go to Josh and Bjorn, but before them, there is a question in the chat. Is it possible someone that what was the music department wanted the money for? I'm just curious.
And I think with that one, Christian, we can save that till we jump over to the music department one.
Okay, yeah, so in that case, let's go with Josh and then we'll go to Bjorn.
And I think Greg had his hand up too after that too.
I was thinking of a couple of things as you're talking, Brandon, and it may be, I don't think there's the budget, the money allocated toward things are spent every year. So if the university is going to fill an additional position, that means they in some ways need to defund something else. And so if this position is going to be funded, it makes sense that probably someone in that division or that area would need to defund some other position within that unit. So it may be worth making a recommendation of what service or what position you would want to eliminate to fund the other one that you're talking about, in a sense. Or what are some of the other options for that funding? Is it cutting back on goods and services? I don't know of that strategy. I think what this, and maybe Greg, you can even talk to this, because I think in the past you've had similar what we call unfunded mandates, and what happens in those scenarios when there's a mandate to fund something like a new position, but no funding to do it. So where do you find that extra money? And is it laying off another position, or is it cutting back on some other service? So there's a balance to that. I don't have the solution for what this particular balance would be, but I just want to bring that understanding that there's some kind of balance, a give and take on that funding. And I'm not saying that to support that position be funded through S&A. I'm just saying there's another side of that coin that'll impact. And I did want to say, since I am already talking, we kind of jumped really quick into talking about some specifics. And I feel like we skipped over talking about what kind of framework we're going to use for making decisions. What are the how are you as students, what are you thinking about when you're thinking about funding or not funding it? How are you assessing what should be funded and what shouldn't be funded? What's like that rubric for guiding what we say yes or no to? And I think back to last year, what the committee was starting to do was going toward there's discussion, and this wasn't perfect, but understanding what are KPIs? How do we know what the deliverables are of all these services? And how do we assess that? Then how can we use some of that knowledge in our funding decisions? And I know that's probably a can of worms to open up at 6:48 at night, but it was a good conversation, I think, for this committee to start to understand how are we going to make these decisions? What are the important things? How do I weigh the value of the marching band against the value of a mental health worker? How are we going to say yes or no to these different services? And that's one reason I was really interested in the survey results that you had talked about, Brandon, with what students thought were the essential services provided, because I thought that could be at least a guide to help us make some of these very difficult decisions. And I, as well as what Terry had mentioned, I view myself as more of an advisor, not a voter on these things, because it's student. I'll probably abstain from everything unless I think it's something that will contribute to serving traditionally underrepresented students or supporting some of our retention efforts. But it's your money, your decision. I want to make sure that you're, as best I can, sharing kind of the bigger picture and helping in that guidance.
I believe Bjorn was up next.
Don't worry, I'm not going to run past your question, Josh. I just got to voice something else at the same time. If we do theoretically pass this budget with no funding for the path coordinator position, are we prepared to have the PBAC say something about that, which may be Uno reverse card fund it? Are we prepared to go through that kind of arbitration, which is a scary word I learned earlier this quarter? I personally believe strongly that I would be able to, or would be willing to do that, because I believe Brandon's right. But I want to make sure that we're prepared to do that kind of thing. Moving to Josh, I would say that one thing that I'm really taking into consideration is what Joel said, if something is appropriate for S&A, which is coming up in this case. Should it be S&A? Should it be somewhere else? Actually, Brandon, are you able to pull up the numbers from this specific thing? And I know this is kind of a unique case in this particular funding area, but are you able to pull up the numbers? Because I'm interested in seeing how students feel about it. I want to channel, I'm a senator by trade, so I want to channel the student body. I don't know about anybody else, but.
Yeah, let me pull up specifically the path coordinator, which is wellness center for us. I guess we'll just do a quick run through over the 450 plus responses. We'll look at, we have the essentiality. So basically it's asking, over your course or your time at CWU, do you believe it's an essential service or not? And then we also have satisfaction. So for those that have used it, it was extremely satisfied, somewhat dissatisfied, extremely dissatisfied. And there was non-applicable, meaning that they never really used it, which goes into utilization, where you have the non-response. So they never used it. We broke it down to annually, monthly, and quarterly. And then there was also daily, but obviously there's no one who used it daily, so that never popped up. And same with weekly. So really, people who did use the path coordinator of the 27 responses, they used it either once a year, monthly, quarterly, and then I also broke it down with using the Power BI by their years. So you can just go by our sophomores, which is our freshmen, knowing it's a little difficult because they're online. You had, out of the 102, about 100 of them never used the thing, but 35 of them, regardless of usage, said they believe it's essential. You can break it down to the other years, your sophomores or your second years. Again, almost all of them never used it. The 30 of them believed it's truly essential. You go into your juniors or your third years. Half of them think it's essential, but again, almost all of them never used it. Go into seniors or fourth years, around 40 of them thought they was essential. Most of them never used it. And the trend pretty much goes into the same with fifth years and your grad students. So I guess really the trend is people do believe it's essential, but is it utilized? Not exactly. I guess I shouldn't say not exactly, but it's not, I guess, utilized a lot throughout people's, I guess, like journey through Central, I guess, or their academic career. But yeah, I guess with that, this is kind of the wellness center or the path coordinator side. Does anyone else have questions?
I
Or want
believe
me to highlight?
I think Greg had a question. I'm not entirely sure if it's on this though.
Okay, I'll stop this then. I can bring it back up.
I don't know. It's so long ago. What I wanted to say, Brandon, was I think you had some really good points when you are questioning this position and who funds it. And I don't know the right strategy. I don't, I think it's difficult to determine how somebody else is going to react or respond. So I think it is tough, but I think where you're coming from is valid. I mean, it is something that the university should fund and not student fees, right? I mean, it's an important position. I think we all agree on that. And even looking at that survey now, I'm thinking, okay, but how the questions asked, and all those students who responded to that, I mean, without sitting through the presentation, I'm looking at that question thinking, I don't know if I would really know what that was about. But I see that point, and I'm thinking what Josh said. Sorry, Josh. But I think that it's not our position to go to the university and say, defund this, or here's the, take away this position to fund this. That's not our job. Our job is to say, fund this. And from what I got from Joel is the university's got a lot of money in reserve. So, we're talking one position. It probably, the money is probably there. And Bjorn, I don't think we can, I don't think we can worry about how PPAC will respond to any of our answers, because, it's how they respond, and then we will respond back if they respond. But I think to forecast that or to determine how that's going to be, for me, I think would be difficult and shouldn't drive our decisions. But that's just my opinion here too. So, but again, I agree with Terry and Josh. This is student money, and really, the students here are the ones that are really, should be saying how to use this. Thank you.
All right, we'll go to Joey and then Lacey.
So a few things on here. Now I'm trying to bounce through because there's multiple throughout all those questions. One, to go to Josh's comment and question, just as a reminder, we do have, and this is why we put it out in terms of how are we making the decisions, the deliberation rubric, which breaks down those areas, and it talks about not only our funding obligations, has it historically been funded, are we contracted, which is only a small area, but is it in alignment with the S&A purposes, which ties with what Joel said? Are they seeking increase? And then what is the scope of impact to students in a general sense? And so that's really where I think, and that's where those four options were coming from, is that document. The other part, I know this has kind of been said, I think, and this is in general, as we talk through deliberation, not specific to this one, we need to be mindful that we can't dictate any other funding. And so while we can encourage or hope that there will be other funding, pretty much the decision we are making is either that we are recommending to fund it or not fund it. With the caveat that may mean that whatever the program or service or positions are may not continue. As Josh kind of alluded to, that it is not uncommon for there to be unfunded mandates at the university saying, yes, this is important, and yes, you need to make this happen, but you have no funding to make it happen on that side. So there's no guarantee on that side
of things. But I agree with what Greg said about PBAC. I mean, it's important to be mindful that that can come up, but I think we have no idea how they're going to vote or what that will be on that side of it. But I think it goes back to there's no guarantee that any of these services and programs, if we do not fund them, will continue. And the other part that I'll kind of share is a twofold. One, to go to your survey data, Brandon, I think it's important for you all to know that this service is specifically, I'm not surprised by the numbers, because this is a response service for students who have been the recipients of sexual assault or power-based personal violence. And so we're not going to see a large number of individuals who utilize that, because it is that specific population who are in there, as well as not all of them will utilize those services for a number of trauma reasons within that. And just for historical perspective, before S&A funded this position, the services were a subset of a program of a health educator position in the Wellness Center. And so, as I said there, the funding of the position created the position as we had in here. Thank you, Greg. Yeah. And I think actually that number has increased to 1 in 4. It's 1 in 4 women and 1 in 5 men with those national stats. So, I mean, things to be mindful of as we look at it is, I think it's good. And like I said, it's not just this program piece that we're talking about, because I know there's going to be others. And I'm telling you that because the comments in the survey that we're going to come up to, that the question is not, do we see a value in the program? But the question is it appropriate for S&A to fund it? Which is absolutely where your all's recommendation comes in. However, we should never make the decision with the caveat that we believe it will be funded somewhere else. Pretty much as we're making the decision is running the risk that we will lose that service and program. And for you all on the student side to be mindful of that balance. I mean, as we've seen before, and Terry mentioned, the recommendations have been with some things, not with this one in the past, but with others of, we're funding it, but we do believe that this needs to be funded elsewhere moving forward, or there needs to be additional funding. And sometimes that has happened. More often than not, that has not happened, that there's the other funding pieces. So that's all.
And I believe Lacey had her hand up too.
Thank you. I wanted to bring up, it's not just about this request, but I think this is a unique one that I want to make sure, especially the students, know this, because you know, you all are paying for it. And so the Wellness Center is actually funded by a student fee. And I bring that up, which is a separate conversation than this position, and it is dedicated to help support that operation of that program. But the reason I bring that up is to really have you make sure you're thinking about the cause and effect of these decisions. And, you know, if this was a scenario, this could potentially be something in the future that is taxed to the students on a different fee. And so at the end of the day, you all are still students. And so I think it's important to make sure that the use of the student fees are being dedicated to the intent and the support of those things. But just know that there are areas that have mixed funding, and this is one of those areas that is supported by another student fee, and could potentially impact the finances for that, and potentially even impact future students.
And Joey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, the one part I just want to add in there, just so you all are aware, and I know we've mentioned this before, but with the wellness fee piece of that, is that there is a part, and I think Marissa mentioned this in her presentation, the wellness fee is only assessed to Ellensburg students, to where the S&A fee, and that's part of why they came before, is this position provides services to our online and students at the centers as well, which would not be able to be the case if it was only funded by the wellness fee. It creates that dual piece. But if there's no other discussion, I mean, I know we have other pieces on here. And again, I appreciate bringing it up, Brandon, because this is what your all's job is to do. Given the fact that, and again, it's in that category because we had a majority piece, is I think from the sounds of discussion that really with this one, we should take an informal vote on whether to keep this in the fully fund category or not within that. But I'm saying that's where we will go. I'm not saying we have to stop discussion. I just see there are no other hands raised, and so I want you to know the next steps with this one.
Looks like Bjorn has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm interested in continuing the discussion. Basically, so like, if theoretically we don't, if we decide not to fund this via S&A, and I mean, it has to be funded somehow. Not funding it would be like dropping a meteor in the middle of the cirque. Speaking university-wise, I'm full of metaphors tonight. If we somehow pushed it through PBAC, like we're not going to worry about that. So they might tack it onto the wellness fee. They might expand the wellness fee to satellite campuses. I'm probably worrying too much about what other people will do, but I do want to consider the potential ramifications, because I can see why they fit it into S&A. I can see that it's like a student service, and I'm considering the possibility that it might be safest to keep it here. This is me almost thinking out loud, so I do apologize for confusion.
And Joey has a comment.
Yeah, no, and I think you're totally right. I mean, that's the part, is these are, and this is just one, right, of the 53 requests we have. These are tough decisions, and you all have a lot of information, a lot of things to weigh with it. So don't apologize for thinking out loud. I think it's helpful for other committee members as well. I think the hard part with these really is we have no guarantee on what would happen. If the committee were to decide not to fund and that moves forward, it's possible that the position could be funded via the Wellness Center. It's possible that there could be state funding. It's also possible that the responsibilities would be absorbed into an existing position and that we would not have a dedicated one. Or it's possible that we would have to look at contracting those services outside the university. I mean, there's any number of options, and we as a committee have no control over it. At that point, our only part is the funding of the S&A fees within that. So, I mean, there is a lot to consider with all of these, not just this one, but each one, if we make a decision to fund or not fund, that's pretty much the extent of what we can guarantee. Any pieces beyond that, we don't know.
I see Josh's hand up.
Just wanted you to all, Joel alluded to this, but there is a process for new funding requests at the university through the budget allocation process that reports up through PBAC. And that process is happening now over the next month or two for funding for next year. And so if the decision was no on this position and the request was that university would fund it, it would need to be part of that process this year in this funding cycle. And that process already started where those requests were submitted. And I'm not sure if that's on that request. Greg might have an idea if it was part of that request, but if it's not, then likely I think what that implication means, it would need to be part of FY23 funding cycle, which would be 1 year without the position. Just wanted to bring that to the table from that perspective.
And I see Brandon's hand up.
Yeah, really, I'm probably gonna make a motion, but I just wanted to row back kind of a point word to what Joey said. We should definitely make our decisions in the scope and the authority of S&A. I know when we're making decisions, we should definitely think of the intent of the S&A dollar, but also think of our decision, not thinking of kind of the what if decisions, because like Joey said, we have no idea what the course of action or the response is going to be, but we should think right here and now, basically, maybe the utilization of the service, the essentiality of the service, and then in our own scope of S&A, do we believe that we should fund it with does it follow our kind of our mission, the intent of the S&A dollar? And so I just wanted to reiterate that, knowing that, the other decisions are not ours and not us to, influence in any sort of way. We know a result or an action will be made after our decision. But I just wanted us to know that that isn't necessarily something we should definitely spend energy or effort on a lot. I think we should really just think of, do we believe it's an essential service for for S&A? Not saying do we support it or do we not support it, especially in this case, I think we absolutely support it, but it shouldn't be funded through S&A. And with that, I make a motion that we move the wellness center or the path coordinator spot to the do not fund section.
Do I see a second? Am I allowed to do a second? Or I can do that.
Technically, Christian, your role is to, I mean, you can, which would put the vote, but then with the vote is you're the tiebreaker on that, so you typically would not vote.
Yeah. So I guess the motion dies and we continue with discussion until a new motion is made.
Okay.
And to clarify, the discussion is really, this was just a part, we wouldn't need to be continuing on wellness unless there's a piece to move it out of the fully fund column. It would remain there and we would go to the rest of the fully fund at this point.
Okay. All right then. I'm gonna second it then. Did you? But I do see Terry's hand up.
Yeah, again, I will be waiting for students to respond, but I think that Brandon makes a valid point, and I wanted to, if you needed a second, I was going to second it in order to move it towards having a vote on it. But again, my preference is always going to be to wait to see what students want to do.
All right. And I see Josh's hand up as well.
We'll just go into, I guess, discussion on the motion now.
So there's a motion, and a second, and now discussion. So.
All right.
My question is it possible, must we fund for 4 years, or can there be a less than 4-year funding commitment that this group can do when looking through all of these? I know ideally it's 4 years and there's reasons for that. I didn't know if there's any policy that could say we fund for 1 year, but it needs to then become part of supplemental. I'm just trying to get some ideas here on what's possible.
Joey, I see your hand up.
So I'll answer that, Josh. So really this process, given the way that the policies are written, unless we were to make a larger decision on all of them, the whole base funding part is for the quadrennium, as that's how the policy is written right now. Not that I want to convolute this, but if you all have the ability to say, no, we're not going to base fund something, and then make a decision that you will do a supplemental funding, which is separate from this whole process. But a group would have to come in and request the supplemental to say, we want you to request for 1 year. And that is not uncommon to say, no, we're not going to fund this, but we request you come forward for supplemental funding instead.
Is there any more discussion? All right, seeing none. We said we're not going to do the poll that comes down on the screen, right?
We don't have one
right.
ability set up in here, so it'll have to be by
so it'll have to be visual.
Eye or show of hands, yeah.
Okay. All right, so motion to move this request to not fund. All in favor, please show a hand, either virtually or electronically. Excuse me.
Question. So on the motion, we're moving the whole thing to not fund, or just the portion of the position?
It's only in the position that's in this funding, Greg. So it'd be moving this funding request to do not fund.
Oh, okay. So
yeah. And just as a reminder, Christian, is the chair, you only vote if there's a tie.
Okay, yeah, got it. All right, so all in favor, please show a hand again. Let's see. 4. All right, all opposed? And all abstain. So I see Greg's hand there. 3, 4. Okay. So I saw 4 yes, 4 abstain, 2 to oppose.
So it would be moved to
So
the
moved.
general fund.
Okay, moved. So the motion passes.
So if we want to jump back, then Lacey, if you want to pull up the spreadsheet to see again with that full fund one here. And I guess the part I'd say is for you all to be mindful in the deliberation, which I think you all with this one and appreciate, especially if we have ones to where, because that one just went from 8 votes to fund and 1 not, to switch the complete other way. So being mindful of discussing why your votes are changing, if they are changing within that. So.
And I do see Sean's hand up.
My apologies. That was just from the vote. I forgot to put it down.
Oh, okay. You're all good, Sean. You're all good.
I think Bjorn has his hand up though, Christian.
Oh, he does. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Bjorn.
Yeah, my emotional scars from that vote are currently healing. If we are clear to move on, I was hoping to bring up the West Side counselors, and I think that career services peer advisors is also considered. Oh, we'll deal with that later because it's not in the max fund. The West Side counselors, I think it merits discussion because that the West Side counselors are put to S&A, but Ellensburg counselors are set to generic funding implies that West Side is somehow, auxiliary. And I understand that there might be this bias that they are, but I don't think they should be treated as such. So I think it would be worthwhile opening up discussion on this particular item. Of course, it's hard to get a funding mandate on this one because if we say do not fund, they might just click.
And I do see Joey's hand up.
Yep. And so I'll share from the survey. That's what I would say with all of them is that I would not make any guarantees or bets on any sort of funding mandate with any of them. Just to further reiterate that. So this one, and again, the vote from the committee who had filled this out was 6 to fully fund and then 3 to fund, but at a lower amount. And that was the extent of it. The comment, though, there was one comment that said, given that this is a priority for West Side students, I would support funding, but feel that this should not be coming from this fee. This should be funded out of career services. We're not treating these students nor these staff members equitably. So again, the comment was in support, I think, in line with what you were saying, Bjorn. But the voting, thank you for pulling up the visual there, Lacey.
Yeah, I agree with what Bjorn's saying. I don't think this should be funded through S&A as well. And I also think, like, I hear what Joey's saying, but I also think this survey should also be taken with a grain of salt, just like as any survey should. We don't know the justification, but then when you hear like the reasoning, I think I don't know, you get a better understanding of like how we should vote. I think a lot of people like went through the survey too, just kind of getting through it. But when we actually get to deliberate and talk more about it, it's natural that our votes will change. But yeah, I just wanted to voice like I'm in support with Bjorn. I don't think, similar to like the last vote, I don't think it should be voted through S&A. There's other places for it to be funded, especially if we have a career services that is funded through state tuition. And then why are we saying West Side shouldn't be funded through state tuition as well? And that is a big question that we should hear answers for. And I think us saying we do not fund it, we will get those answers.
Any more comments? Just looking here.
I
Bjorn. Let's go to Bjorn and then Lacey.
Yeah, sorry, it's just a question. How long has this been funded by S&A? Is it, does anyone know the history behind it, like when it came to S&A?
I will pull that up, Bjorn, in a sec.
I'm impressed that you have that. Joey keeps records on everything.
It's loading. So hold on, let me pull up my spreadsheet. And this is the West Side, correct? Career Services West Side Counselor.
Yep.
We have funded this position since 2006.
Was that when the centers were opened, or?
No, but that is almost as far back as my records will go. I can go back about 2 more years. We started funding the position with S&A, partial funding, in 2006. So for the last 15 years.
I see. Okay.
I believe Lacey had a comment as well.
I did. I have a couple of comments. So one of the first comments that I want to reiterate to the committee is that we do have an obligation to our historical funded areas. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm saying we can't change what we are potentially allocating, but I do want to bring that up again, because when we have these solidified programs funded this way, it actually means that there might not be opportunities for other funding. Now, Joey has mentioned quite a few times that, you know, we can't think about necessarily the future and like the what ifs. And I agree, we can't. But I do want the committee to understand that by doing this, by voting to do not fund, is essentially cutting the program. Josh touched on this, but there is, I want to make sure all the students are aware of this process, is if there is any sort of need to request new funding for next fiscal year, the deadline will have passed before we will actually finally make a decision on what is funded and is what not. So that kind of means that for the next year, it's off the table. So just be mindful of you know, those decisions, and know that Joey and I will probably keep kind of pushing of the discussion and of the why, because this is the stuff that at the end of the day, we will want to make sure that we're documenting and that it's clear, not just to the program, but also to PBAC, the president, the provost, kind of all those individuals, so that they understand the reason why behind it.
And I think our reason is that it shouldn't be funded through S&A. Like we said, like we think we fully support it. It's a great activity, but it shouldn't be, I guess, like funded through us. There's definitely like an equity thing there. It's kind of like what I'm thinking.
And those are the notes we have Aubrey taking on the side to assist us to wrap it up at the end.
Are there any more comments on this, on the West Side counselors? I don't see any others, so and there is no motion, like I'm not missing a hand or anything like that.
There's
Okay.
not been one made yet, Christian. So unless someone makes one, it would really be whichever point of topic we want to touch base on in this fully funded first. Because again, I want to, if we have one solidified, I'd like to have that here, and then let's move to the do not fund based on that to have discussion there.
Okay. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about in that section, the fully fund?
Yeah. To be honest with it.
Is there a copy of the list in the Teams? Because I just want to check and see what's fully funded and such.
So Yes, there is, but to be honest, I'll probably end up having to take that PDF down. And so I was a little hesitant on sharing that in Teams, mostly because of just the last couple of conversations that we've had at the committee level. So it's going to be constantly changing. And so the list is in there, but I did write draft on it. But just know that after this meeting, I'll probably end up taking that PDF down, just so people don't get confused about having multiple documents out there.
I am a fool who does not look at the bottom of the file. Thank you.
But I guess like going back to the discussion we had, I moved to, I guess like I make a motion to move the West Side Career Services to the Do Not Fund, because I will say fully support it, but I don't think it should be funded through S&A.
And is there a second to his motion? Seeing none, Terry has her hand up.
Yeah, I will, again, I was waiting for students to weigh in, but I will second this just so we can have a vote on it.
All right. And then we go into discussion first, or we go in the vote?
Discussion.
Discussion. All right. Any discussion on this motion? Bjorn, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm trying to balance the is it appropriate for S&A with the we might be cutting this program's funding, especially since there's far less of a mandate than there was with the wellness path coordinator. I'm just concerned about the potential of there being no funding mandate and potentially, hitting West Side students real hard when the campuses or the center campuses are just starting to like develop and get off the ground.
And I see Greg's hand up as well.
So I guess clarity for me, I'm slow sometimes, but so this is $170,000 that we're gonna move to not fund. Is that, I'm looking at the right one here,
Yes.
Lacey?
Yep.
Yeah, and so, and this was was funded. So these are actually real people in real positions that would probably be losing their job with this. Is that what I can assume?
I would say the funding would be cut. And so the decision would be up to that area on what the staffing would end up having to be.
Any more discussion? Zoe, did I see your hand up? No, okay. All right, seeing no more discussion, I believe we're ready to vote. So all in favor of moving West Side Counseling Services to the do not fund category, please show a hand. And all opposed? And all who abstain? All right. The motion has not been passed. All right. Any other discussion points for the fully funded category? Bjorn, I see your hand up.
To clarify, I don't have this in my notes, so I'm sorry. Preparation fail. What does the administrative fee cover?
Yeah. So the presentation and the details are in Teams, but it's a lot. And so the summary of it is it's an administrative fee that helps support administrative costs that are associated with funding that the S&A fee is funding. I know that's a lot of words that I just threw out there, but it funds certain things like the heavy hitters are like the travel costs. So the people that help, set up the travel for the students, reimbursements, AP, payroll is a huge one. So what that means is that administrative cost, for example, payroll, is set up to offset the impact that we have student jobs coming out of these programs. So it's across the board, and it's more programs like that. There's ITs in there, if I remember correctly, but those are kind of the categories of where that funding it helps support.
That was the night where I learned the word arbitration. Okay.
Yes, it was that night, Bjorn.
And I do want to say it is an increase from the current funding cycle. And so I to have the committee look at that. But if you want to look at the calculations and anything like that, let me know. It is pretty in depth. And through this committee, they have talked about it for many, many years, about the whole process of just the admin fees.
Any more discussion on the fully fund category?
Now, I do want to just say, I mean, the idea of this is that we would be moving to the next category. Keep in mind that nothing until we finalize deliberation is final. So I don't want anyone to worry like this is your one chance, let's talk about everything right now. When we get the dollar figure, this just gives that dollar figure that Lacey is putting up there as a solid amount of what we're currently at and looking at. So if there's nothing else in the fully funded, I think the next logical one is to jump to the ones that based on the survey are looking at the do not fund to see if there's any in there that you on the committee want to talk about or raise questions about. Obviously the one we just moved there, we've had discussion on that, but I think there's a couple of the new ones who were in here, but then I think it would probably be beneficial, especially given that it's a public meeting, for there to be some discussion on the other two that are currently base funded on that, just for the sake of the notes and to help Aubrey when we get to the end, right, if that's where they stay. So if we can move to the do not fund any on there that everyone wants to discuss or look at.
So I'll kind of just go through the list really quick. So the music department, remember that there's 3 different funded programs through the music department. This is the one that we kind of identify as the S&A music. So it's more generic. To give you an idea, the other 2 are marching band and pep band, excuse me. And then we have Wildcat Films, which are the 2 currently funded areas that are per the survey that have said that we should not fund. I highlighted wellness as red just so we can have some tracking of the end goal here.
Okay, thank you, Lacey. And I do see Bjorn's hand up.
With this one, I ended up voting to like partially fund because of the way that I believe this is entirely travel expenses according to my notes. So travel's, going to be cut down for the next foreseeable time. That was why I voted to partially fund. I do think it's worthwhile noting that this is like a huge opportunity for the students who participate in it. Like getting to play Benaroya Hall is immense. And without that travel budget, they can't really do it because evidently the music department can't support that by itself. But I do notice that we don't have a breakdown of non-major to major students. Jess asked that question in my notes. And that kind of makes me wonder because CWU's music program is great, but this might not be something that's extending to a large number of students.
Joey, you have your hand up.
Yes, and now I'm trying to remember what I was going to say because then Bjorn said something else in there that my brain went off of. So what was I going to say? I was going to share the survey. I mean, so and I know you can see, and Lacey had it, there was one comment that was made with this one. And so I'll share that with the music department. Really, the only comment was all of these requests should go through the same process as the rest of clubs. And this one was, as you saw from the pie chart a minute ago, 1 vote to fully fund at requested, 3 to partially, and then 5 not. And so it was 4 votes to fund in some capacity and 5 not to on that side.
All right, let's go Greg and then Josh.
Yeah, I just was going to mention that what I recall from the presentation was before my time on this committee and maybe before my time at Central, but that what I understood, and maybe Joey can clarify or Lacey, that this committee requested them to actually come up with this type of funding because they were coming back so many times asking for travel money that it was actually a request from this committee to do it. But now that we've handed off that supplemental to somebody else, maybe it's not our concern now. But I think that was part of the reason, and so just to point that out.
I just want to clarify that this funding actually doesn't go to music clubs. So I think I wanted to make everybody aware of that just in the conversation. This is actually for ensembles. And so it is different than the clubs, just in case that matters to anybody.
I think you said I could go next, so I'll just jump in.
Yes, Josh.
I've seen this statement is less about this particular one, but this particular one prompted the question of us having a discussion on what should go through supplemental versus this process. And what Greg brings up seems to align with that. Should this sort of request for travel sorts of things, and I don't know if this is travel, I have it pulled up here, I could get into it, but my question is more about how do we decide what clearly should be in supplemental versus the quadrennial budget? And Lacey, have you gone over all of these and do you have a recommendation for us? Are there any that should be in supplemental but have gotten into the quadrennial budget? Just from your massive knowledge of everything budget.
Everything budget.
And I use the word should. I don't know if should's the right word, but I've sat through quite a bit of the supplementals, and it seems like some of the quadrennial budget presentations could have fit within the supplemental presentations that I've sat through in the past.
I mean, honestly, Josh, I would agree with you. I'm not sure I would list every single one that I think, because I think that's a really good decision for the students to make. But what my advice would be for the voting members would be, I love that you're thinking about supplemental versus what I would call operating expenses. I think that's critical for this group because we do have quite a bit of supplemental money. And the truth is we almost have more supplemental money than we do have incoming each year. And so for expenses like equipment and software and one-time kind of expenses, I would absolutely advise the committee to think about that supplemental budget and utilize it in that way, because it can be difficult for us to utilize the supplemental budget as best as we can if we're not continually thinking about equipment and, whatever that might be. Now, travel, I could see that go either way. I really could. I could see that being a supplemental request, and I also could see it being base funded. I think the difficult piece with this specific one is that the S&A committee felt like they got hit pretty hard with the requests with the sheer amount of requests from the supplemental. But that doesn't mean that the funding shouldn't necessarily be a supplemental resource, I guess is my point.
Okay, I think Brandon's up and then Joey has another question.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like it's a pretty big question, the one we should consider when we're thinking of we're at a point now with like S&A that we have academic departments coming in and requesting base funding from S&A. And I feel like we should reflect on kind of like S&A and kind of like, again, the intent of this money. It's for, I think, services and activities that truly impact all the students. at CWU because again, this is a fee that's assessed to every student enrolled. And when we think of specific academic departments, they're saying, oh, this impacts all of CWU, but then we look into it, say, as we're talking about music department, this is going to specific ensembles to travel each year. And then when you think of a student, is it right for us to have like, I guess the S&A, so the student life world and academic worlds, letting the academic world take that money from student life? To me, I don't think that's right. It's already, there is money set aside for the colleges. We know it's a fact now, talking to Joel, that they do have reserves. Yes, we have our own reserves, but I don't think that should be going to student ensemble travel because you're a music major, because you're part of a specific ensemble. I don't see like me, I guess, as just a normal student who's not a part of the music department feeling good about funding that and spending my money every quarter for that to happen. And I know that's like, and that's where I think, yes, there's supplementals for that, but I don't think base funding is for that. Again, there's like, I think like what Joel said, like a generational equity, as well as it is also a slippery slope when you think of base funding academic departments, because now look at us, we have like at least like 6 something academic departments now asking for base funding, which to me does not seem right. When we're thinking about this type of money and the intent of the S&A money. So that's why I also voted that we should not fund this, even though it was historically funded. Yeah.
And then Joey, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on, now I can't remember, I think what Chris said, of that is the historical part of it, so you all know for context. These were all requests that were coming via supplemental, and you can look back at all the things. I mean, even with what they've been using their base funding for, there's quite a large number that come every year, because it fits within the supplemental funding pieces of the S&A budget to do travel for conferences or competitions and those things. And so it was one that the committee at the time made the determination to treat it similar to how they treated sports clubs and others, is to give that pot of money there to allocate out instead of it coming directly to the committee at the time that they made that decision. So, I mean, and really to clarify with this one, and this is not one way or the other, I mean, if you continue funding it, obviously things would stay the same. If you discontinue funding it, it does not discontinue the ability for those groups to have these opportunities. It is going to change what that process looks like within it, meaning either, unless we make other changes, they are coming directly to the S&A committee with each one of those requests for supplemental funding, or going another route, whether that be through ASCWU if we're having other supplemental requests go there or somewhere else. So this is a little bit different than the ones we've been talking about before, is that this is taking that dedicated pool of money that goes to opportunities, but they would still have the opportunity to do a supplemental request beyond that. So, and I think that's what I was hearing within this, is feeling twofold. One, there's the specific to an academic department, but also the sounds of it being that this is supplemental requests in the past that the committee requested go base funding to avoid the committee having to see all of them coming in.
And I see Brandon's hand up.
Yeah, and I just think on addition to that, as we write down like our reasons why, I don't think this should be funded through S&A. I don't think they should necessarily come back for supplementals either, knowing that, talking to Joel, like this is something that the dean of that like college should be able to, whether it is like, I don't know, change the funding around since they'll have some over this year, but we know there's a substantial reserves. Yeah, it's like, I guess, separated in a way we don't know between colleges, but when it comes to, I guess, like a music major student who's specializing in their specific instrument and specific ensemble, I don't see why that should even be a supplemental too, or come through S&A whatsoever. And so I think we have those multiple reasons. I think we shouldn't be base funding the academic department, as well as I don't think this is, a fair usage of S&A money, and I don't think S&A money should be funded for this at all because it's not inclusive. But yeah, I guess with that, I mean, there's really no vote to that. We're just having discussion, right?
Yep.
I guess with that, I mean, we, I guess move on. I guess I call the next point in the agenda, which would be talking about the other one, Wildcat film.
Yeah. Well, we do have 2 questions up. I don't want to just skip over them. So let's go to Greg and then Terry.
So just, I guess that, one way or the other, but I think, Brandon, that what Joel said about this sounded like huge reserves in the colleges. It's not the same for every college. And so CA, which I'm a part of, I can tell you that there is no reserve that even to try to get $100 from the dean to do something is almost impossible at this moment. So it's that, I don't know what Joel's talking about, but within this college, it doesn't exist. And I don't know about each college, right? But I just heard business has a lot of money. So that's a different story, right? I mean, it's not the same college to college. And I think if we're going to make decisions on that, we should maybe look at those numbers closer, but just my thought.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say just CA. I think for all colleges, I think there needs to be a precedent set where there is no base funding of academic departments. I mean, just for me, I don't think that academic life or the side of academia where they do have their own money coming from multiple sources should be dipping into, I guess, student life money as well. Yeah.
And then Terry, you had a question? You had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add what the university considers reserves and money that can be spent to other things is, I have to tell you, I have sat with my dean for 6 hours in the past year, running through every little piece of our college budget. And I can tell you that what the university considers reserves, most of the money is already earmarked. It's already spent in other things and is detailed to other things. So what Greg is saying at the university level for all, and this is all of the colleges, this is not just for my college or whatever, I hear what you're saying, and I agree that we need to have equity. So if you're going to let music do this, you need to all of the areas need to do this. So I completely, but I just want to be a little clear that what Joel says is reserves and money. I can tell you, if any of the deans were here, they would push back on Joel saying that there's $7 million worth of college money sitting there that has not being spent there. For instance, I will say, for instance, for me as a faculty member, I have money that's been allocated to me to go to conferences. As part of my job, I have to do scholarship. And so I have to go literally do presentations at conferences in order to keep my job. And that's what's considered part of that reserve money, is the money that is earmarked for me to go do that. So it's not like the dean can go say, "Oh, okay, we're going to take all of the faculty money to go to conferences because then I can't do my job." So when he's saying that's the reserve money, the university counts that as reserves, but that doesn't mean that the money is already allocated. So I'm just saying, please be cautious about taking what they say is reserves and they have it all sitting in the colleges. You will notice that they didn't say about all the money that the president or they made it look like the colleges have all this money, and I would just be really cautious about taking that with a major grain of salt.
Brandon, did you have another question, another comment? Your hand's up.
A little bit. I know we're just spending a lot of, I think, energy on like reactions and actions of other people. And again, I think we just need to circle back to the scope of S&A, knowing like what we're making our decisions on, which is, I think, the utilization, the intent of S&A money, and then also just kind of, I mean, I wrote it down, but also just kind of like not thinking of like the what ifs. Like we know Joel went through the process. We know there's a process out there. It doesn't really matter what happens. I think what I really want to push forward here is that we set precedent, that we don't like I don't see we should be funding these academic departments with S&A money. And it's clear because of the reasons we said. I mean, an equity thing, who's benefiting from this? Music department, music majors. With the other ones too, I would say the exact same thing. They're gonna say it's open to all the other students, but when you look at it, it's like who truly benefits? It's probably the kids who are in that college or in that major. And it's just like, to me, this is also just a slippery slope. I mean, you can go back to the recording. And he's like, I was like, why do you think you should be funded over all the other ones? And he's like, I think they shall be funded. And I'm just like, no way. Like, this is money that should be for services, activities for all students. It's the fee that's assessed to all students. And I mean, we can look at data too, and it's just like, especially for this one, are you saying like every student should pay so that one trumpet ensemble should travel? I don't think so. And that's from my personal student perspective, which I think is very valuable here as a voice of a student. And I'm going to say the same thing for all the other ones. There should be a definite line and division between the money that's already going to these places through colleges, through tuition, through state funding, and then our money, our student money through fees. And so that's what I'm trying to say here, and why I truly believe it should not be funded and it shouldn't be funded in the future. And when we talk about all the other ones, I'm going to say the exact same thing that are tied to academic departments. There's English department that's later on, as well as a bunch of college of business departments. I don't think any of them should be funded, and I truly think they should all be moved to do not fund. Until those, like, I can say I support the idea behind the services and stuff for some of them, but I don't think they should be managed or anything or tied whatsoever to an academic department. Not when it's being funded by every student on campus with the S&A money. And so that's what I support, this one not being funded, and it's pretty much what I'm going to reiterate for all the other ones that have us like a / with an academic department to it. They should not be funded. And yeah, I'll leave it there for further discussion.
Okay, so I saw Lacey, and then we'll go to Bjorn.
Yeah, mine's just probably more of a question for Brandon for to make sure our notes and documentation is good to go. So Brandon, what I'm hearing, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not so much about the reserve balance in the academic colleges, it's more about the intent of the S&A money. So I guess the question I have is that correct? Is it's really the intent of the funding versus what the reserve balances currently are?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's what's truly important. It doesn't matter like how much money is out there or what's going to happen. Like if the provost can, whatever it's called, do the circumvention or whatever. That doesn't matter to us. I think what truly matters is the intent behind S&A money, and it should not be going to fund FTEs or fund specific student majors to do travel or something. There are a million other routes, and I'm not going to say they should go to them because that's outside the scope. I think what's important here is that this is service and activities student money, and should be going to benefit all the students, and it should be going to service and activities that are outside of academia. There shouldn't be a blur of the two, and that's what I truly believe, and I think we should vote that way, and I think the precedent should be set now for that.
And then Bjorn, you had something to say.
Regardless of my opinion vis-a-vis drawing a hard line, I'm going to kind of tentatively suggest a middle ground in that performances on campus, whether it be Ellensburg or the center campuses, do provide a benefit to students in that they are free to students, except the ones that are paid, which are at a discount to students, according to the questions we ask them. 100 plus free concerts yearly, total of like, which is, pretty impressive. I think it might be worthwhile considering cutting their funding so that stuff that doesn't take place on campus is their own responsibility, but that S&A still provides funding for what does occur on campus and does directly benefit students. Oh, you're right. I'm an idiot. You're right. This is all for travel. They hoodwinked me. The presentation got me. Darn it. I feel like a fool.
Can I jump in, Christian? I mean, I think.
Yeah, sure.
So twofold. One, where we're at, because I would like us to get to this next point. So logically, we met where I was hoping we would get tonight. I mean, I would like us to, because I think we've heard the same thing. And so if this was in a vote, I'd say call the question, because I think at the point, there's no motion on it unless someone's going to motion to move it out of the do not fund, which I have not heard yet. And so I would like us to jump over to the other current base funding one that we're looking at, Wildcat Films, just to touch on so we can have any discussion on the piece of that. And again, not needing to reiterate if it's similar things we've already said, we can say it's for the same reason. I know Brandon already said he's going to say that. And so you can say that, Brandon, but I also know we're getting close to time for the meeting. And so after we finish that, I do want to give a brief, here's what we're going to do next come Saturday. But if we can get through the Wildcat Films discussion, if there is any discussion, I think that would be beneficial on it. And that one was a pretty brief. I know Lacey's showing the visual. There was only one comment made out of this, which was that I do not support fully funding the staff position out of S&A money, but didn't touch on any of the other pieces within that. So with that, if there is any comment or pieces people want to discuss on this so we can make note, I would appreciate it.
Any comments on that? Seeing none, I believe we're going to go on to what Joey was just talking about. And so.
Is there anything else with those do not fund? Just to clarify, I want to give everyone a chance. I know the other do not funds are our new funding requests that are in there.
Oh, I think I could just like jump in and just kind of show like why I think I voted not to fund Wildcat Films. Oh, already sharing the screen, so I can't. But it's on Power BI. It's almost more than half of the people that took the survey voted on essentiality of like 5 or less. Like students don't believe it's an essential service that should be funded by the S&A. I'll just share it real quick. But when you look over here, most of the students, it's a 5 or less. You can see the trend that most of them don't think it's essential. And I think that's kind of like, I think the student voice as well through our own committee survey kind of reflected that. So I just wanted, to show that, it's not just within the committee, but it's almost like a holistic university, I guess, like opinion when it comes to like, do they believe that their S&A money should be funding Wildcat Films?
Terry, you have a question?
Yeah, my question was, I found it interesting that the Money Savvy Wildcats and was a do not fund, but the financial services people was a fund. And I found both of those to be very similar. And so that was why that's the only question that I have about that is, where the line is there. Oh, and I hear what Brandon's saying about the, either, you do everybody or you do nobody. And I actually think that's the equitable way of doing that, for doing that. But that particular one wasn't going to a department. That was that piece. And so of doing that for students. And I was just trying to figure out, kind of what the reasoning was for funding one of them and not the other.
Terry, I mean, when you said funding one of them but not the other, you mean the other similar, which one were you talking about? Just to clarify, that one is not necessarily, that is in the split piece, which there's discussion on whether to fund it or not. It was just not a consensus. So I know we'll get to that one on Saturday, but just to be clear, that one was not necessarily the committee was saying to fund the other one either.
Right. No, I just thought it was odd that they didn't end up together. I wouldn't have thought it was odd if they ended up in the same group. I just thought it was odd that they didn't end up together. because it's not a department thing. And I get the other thing we were talking about department things. I didn't see it. I just thought it was odd that it didn't end up together. That's all. I was just interested in why people thought why they put them in different categories.
I think
Any more
that's something-
comments?
I was just gonna say we could probably talk on that on Saturday because yeah, I feel the same. Like the president should say it, and the way I voted on one is the way I feel about all the others. So regardless, I think we're gonna have a discussion on all of them that have like related to a academic department. I can assure that, but I'll definitely like let that go for Saturday.
And to touch on it, Terry, I mean, because the comments are in the piece there, the comments from the survey were a lot of, we feel these are similar requests or they should be combined into one, or those pieces. It was only a slight number difference that one made it to a majority was do not fund, and the other one was just enough that it's technically split, but we'll talk about it Saturday for sure. No, it's a great point and I appreciate you bringing it up. Yeah.
I'm just going to tack on to that. So really, we tried to categorize this the best that we could, but we can absolutely see any of these departments compared next to each other, not just these two, but to kind of give you an idea is there was just a lot of mixed answers with the student financial one.
Any more comments? Bjorn, you have one.
If we're talking briefly about Wildcat Films, I think the survey collected was the survey of students was kind of damning for them, in that very few people know that Wildcat Films exists. I have been in a few situations where people have wanted to, film something, but haven't, known about it. But that is personal experience, and I'm more inclined to give way to the survey here, in that Wildcat Films is not something a lot of people access. Even on their website, there's very few client examples, and the few that are there are usually individual people, like one person. I do apologize if anyone hates me now for prolonging this discussion.
You are okay, Bjorn. Don't worry about it. Any other comments before we get ready to wrap up? Seeing none, or Joe, you have something to say?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give an update where people are at. And Jess just put a comment in there that she would like to motion to see if we can continue discussion later. So to continue beyond the 8 o'clock time frame. I know hers is on there. So technically there's a motion on there. I don't know, and I'm looking to Aubrey or others because I know we have, given the setup of this, we have tech support. So I don't know if we're able to go beyond that. So I'm waiting for some indication.
If it's not extended, it's going to be automatically tabled, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, so, and that's what I was going to say. It would be continued at that point. So, I mean, I guess I'll say this part and then I'll leave it in case there is a second. If there's not, then obviously we would go to the next part. Is really where we're at right now is we've gone through the survey of those that are under the yes fully fund and the yes do not fund based on the results. We have those two other sections. And so I know Lacey has the draft one that's in there, which is not the updated from what we discussed. I think she said she may update it here. So when you look in Teams, just in preparation for the Saturday meeting, if you want to look at that, the next two areas we're really coming up on is we're going to look at the section next that is the fund, but at a lower level. And so those are the categories that you'll see to where the majority of the vote, and some of them are in there, but it's majority said, yes, we want to fund it, but at a lower level, to talk about what those levels are, because that gives us, again, where that bottom line dollar figure is as a better sense. And then we'll go into those split ones because the split really are all over. Some of them are split, but they're still close to we don't fund, or some of them are split on fully fund or partial. Those are a lot different, which we can delve into on Saturday when we get into it. But at this point, again, until we get to the end, of the full deliberation, we'll make a motion, but otherwise everything is still kind of on the table for us to be discussing. I think the other part is we'll see as we get into that, what that bottom dollar figure is for allocation, because keep in mind, we're looking to allocate out $7.4 million. And we haven't really, we've gotten through maybe half of the allocation requests, but these other ones, given the survey results you all completed, are going to be a little bit more divided than what we already had even. So.
Okay. Do we have any old business?
No.
No. All right. Second call for public comments. Any questions, comments, concerns? Lacey, I think that's your hand up.
It is. So like Joey mentioned, I'm gonna go ahead and take that PDF out of Teams just so that it's not confusing to everybody because there's changes. But do you all have any, anything that you want to reference before our next meeting? Do you want me to go ahead and PDF that document so you have an updated version, or is there anything else that you are looking for?
Yeah, a PDF of the updated version would be great. Thank you.
I'll update that now.
All right, and I believe it was Josh, and then we'll go to Joey.
Hi, my public comment is I just wanted to say I appreciate all of you having these difficult conversations. This is no easy task. It's very difficult to do, and you guys have been doing a fantastic job. Keep pressing in, keep everyone coming to the table. Saturday is going to be another round of fun discussions, but just really impressed with all of your input and thoughtfulness in this. Made me proud to be a Wildcat with what you are all doing. So keep it up.
Thank you, Josh. And then Joey, you had something to say too?
Yes, I do. Although I'm going to read, there's a comment in the Q&A, which I'll share here just for consideration, which, and again, you all can see it, but just confusing a little on the funding at a lower level. For example, campus activities and homecoming and KCWU and Wildcat Sports Radio Network each combined 2 budgets in their presentations, just to think about for Saturday. And then my comment was going to be, and thank you, Jenna, that was one of them, was going to be good luck with finals for students. I know we will see you all before we get into finals week, but good luck with that. And my dog has public comment as well. I apologize. The other part is just as a reminder, I know we're having really in-depth and difficult conversations. I appreciate all of your willingness to speak your mind and kind of where your rationale and things are, and the civil discourse you all are having, because these are really big decisions. And as I constantly point out, this committee has a really heavy responsibility, and appreciate you all taking it seriously. The other part is knowing we're in the middle of this, to keep in mind that nothing so far is a final decision. And I say this not just for you, for the committee, but also on the recording and for people in there, that until we get to the part of the committee making their final recommendation, there's been nothing that's been officially determined yet. And even that is a recommendation forward. But at this point, because I don't want people coming out saying something has been fully funded yet or has not, until we get to the end of that. So just to be clear.
And any more comments, questions, or concerns? Seeing none, can I entertain a motion to adjourn today's meeting?
Terry's nodding. I count that as
Okay, we'll count that. Do I see a second?
Yeah, I'll second.
Seconded by Brandon. All in favor, please show a hand. All opposed? All abstain? All right, motion passes.
Thank you all. Don't forget to use the link that Frank sent you for the Saturday deliberation when you come into it, just like this one today.
Yeah. Have a nice night, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.